The Balloon by Donald Barthelme. The balloon, beginning at a point on 14th Street, the exact location of which I cannot reveal, expanded northward all one night, while people were sleeping, until it reached the park. There, I stopped it. At dawn, the northernmost edges lay over the plaza. The free-hanging motion was frivolous and gentle, but experiencing a faint irritation at stopping, even to protect the trees, and seeing no reason the balloon should not be allowed to expand upward over the parts the city was already covering into the airspace to be found there, I asked the engineers to see to it. This expansion took place throughout the morning. Soft, imperceptible sighs of gas through the valves. The balloon then covered 45 blocks north-south in an irregular area east-west, as many as 6 crosstown blocks on either side of the avenue in some places. That was the situation, then. But it's wrong to speak of situations, implying sets of circumstances leading to some resolution, some escape of tension. There were no situations, simply the balloon hanging there. Muted heavy grays and browns for the most part, contrasting with walnut and soft yellows. A deliberate lack of finish, enhanced by skillful installation, gave the surface a rough, forgotten quality. Sliding weights on the inside, carefully adjusted, anchored the great, very-shaped mass at a number of points. Now, we've had a flood of original ideas in all media, works of singular beauty as well as significant milestones in the history of inflation. But at that moment, there was only this balloon, concrete particular, hanging there. There were reactions. Some people found the balloon interesting. As a response, this seemed inadequate to the immensity of the balloon. The suddenness of its appearance over the city, on the other hand, in the absence of hysteria or other societal-induced anxiety, it must be judged a calm, mature one. There was a certain amount of initial augmentation about the meaning of the balloon. This subsided because we've learned not to insist on meanings, and they are rarely even looked for now, except in cases involving the simplest, safest phenomena. It was agreed that since the meaning of the balloon could never be known absolutely, extended discussion was pointless, or at least less purposeful than the activities of those who, for example, hung green and blue paper lanterns from the warm gray underside in certain streets, or seized the occasion to write messages on the surface announcing their availability for the performance of unnatural acts or the availability of acquaintances. Daring children jumped, especially at those points where the balloon hovered close to a building, so that the gap between the balloon and the building was a matter of a few inches, or points where the balloon were actually made contact, exerting an ever so slight pressure against the side of a building, so that the balloon and building seemed a unity. The upper surface was so structured that a landscape was presented, small valleys as well as slight knolls or mounds. Once atop the balloon, a stroll was possible, or even a trip from one place to another. There was pleasure in being able to run down an incline, then up the opposing slope, both gently graded, or in making a leap from one side to the other. Bouncing was possible because of the pneumaticity of the surface, and even falling, if that was your wish. But all these varied motions, as well as others, were within one's possibilities, and experiencing the upside of the balloon was extremely exciting for children accustomed to that city's flat, hard skin. But the purpose of the balloon was not to amuse children. 2, the number of the people, children and adults, who took advantage of the opportunities described was not so large as it might have been. A certain timidity, lack of trust in the balloon was seen. There was, furthermore, some hostility, because we had hidden the pumps, which fed helium to the interior, and because the surface was so vast that the authorities could not determine the point of entry, that is, the point at which the gas was injected. A degree of frustration was evidenced by those city officers whose province such manifestations normally fell. The apparent purposelessness of the balloon was vexing, as was the fact that it was there at all. Had we painted in great letters, "Laboratory tests prove," or 18% more effective on the sides of the balloon, this difficulty would have been circumvented. But I could not bear to do so. On the whole, these officers were remarkably tolerant, considering the dimensions of the anomaly, this tolerance being the result of, first, secret tests conducted by night that convinced them that little or nothing could be done in the way of removing or destroying the balloon, and secondly, a public warmth that arose, not uncolored by touches of the aforementioned hostility, towards the balloon, from ordinary citizens. As a single balloon must stand for a lifetime of thinking about balloons, so each citizen expressed, in the attitude he chose, a complex of attitudes. One man might consider that the balloon had to do with the notion sullied, as in the sentence, "The big balloon sullied the otherwise clear and radiant Manhattan sky." That is, the balloon was, in this man's view, an imposture, something inferior to the sky that had formerly been there, something intersposed between the people and their sky. But in fact, it was January. The sky was dark and ugly. It was not a sky you could look up to, lying on your back in the street with pleasure, unless pleasure for you proceeded from having been threatened, from having misused. And the underside of the balloon was a pleasure to look up into. We had seen that the muted grays and browns, for the most part, contrasted with the walnut and soft forgotten yellows. And so, while this man was thinking sullied, still there was an admixture of pleasurable cognition in his thinking, struggling with the original perception. Another man, on the other hand, might view the balloon as if it was part of a system of unanticipated rewards. And when one's employer walks in and says, "Hey, Henry, take this package of money I have wrapped for you because we've been doing so well in the business here, and I admire the way that you bruise the tulips, without which bruising your department would not be a success, or at least not the success that it is." For this man, the balloon might be a brilliantly heroic muscle and pluck experience, even if an experience poorly understood. Another man might say, without the example of, "It is doubtful that what exists today in its present form," and find many to agree with him, or to argue with him. Ideas of bloat and float were introduced, as well as the concepts of dream and responsibility. Others engaged in remarkably detailed fantasies having to do with a wish either to lose themselves in the balloon or to engorge it. The private character of these wishes, of their origins, deeply buried and unknown, was such that they were not much spoken of. Yet there is evidence that they were widespread. It was also argued that what was important was what you felt when you stood under the balloon. Some people claimed that they felt sheltered, warmed, as never before, while enemies of the balloon felt, or reported feeling, constrained, a heavy feeling. Critical opinion was divided. Monstrous pourings, harp, certain contrasts with darker portions, inner joy, large square corners, conservative eclecticism that has so far governed modern balloon design, abnormal vigor. Warm, soft, lazy passages. Has unity been sacrificed for a sprawling quality? Quelle catastrophe? Munching. People began in a curious way to locate themselves in relation to aspects of the balloon. I'll be at that place when it dips down into 47th Street almost to the sidewalk, near the Alamo's Chili House. Or why don't we go stand on top and take the air and maybe walk a bit, where it forms a tight curving line with the facade of the Gallery of Modern Art. Marginal intersections offered entrances within a given time duration, as well as warm, soft, lazy passages in which, but it is wrong to speak of marginal intersections. Each intersection was crucial. None could be ignored, as if walking there you might not find someone capable of turning your attention in a flash from old exercises to new exercises, risks and relations. Each intersection was crucial. Meeting of the balloon and the building, meeting of the balloon and man, meeting of the balloon and balloon. It was suggested that what was admired about the balloon was finally this, that it was not limited or defined. Sometimes a bulge, blister, or subsection would carry all the way east to the river on its own initiative, in the manner of an army's movements on a map, as seen in a headquarters remote from the fighting. But that part would be, as it were, thrown back again, or withdrawal into new dispositions the next morning. That part would have made another sortie, or disappeared altogether. This ability of the balloon to shift its shape, to change, was very pleasing, especially to people whose lives were rather rigidly patterned, persons whom change, although desired, was not available. The balloon, for the 22 days of its existence, offered that possibility, in its randomness of mislocation of the self, in contradistinction to the grind of precise rectangular pathways under our feet. The amount of specialized training currently needed and the consequent desirability of long-term commitments has been occasioned by the steadily growing importance of complex machinery in virtually all kinds of operations. As this tendency increases, more and more people will turn in bewildered inadequacy to solutions for which the balloon may stand as a prototype or a rough draft. I meet you under the balloon on the occasion of your return from Norway. You asked if it was mine. I said it was. The balloon, I said, is a spontaneous autobiographical disclosure having to do with the unease I felt at your absence, and with the sexual deprivation, but now that your visit to Bergen has been terminated, it is no longer necessary or appropriate. Removal of the balloon was easy. Trailer trucks carried away the depleted fabric, which is now stored in West Virginia, awaiting some other time of unhappiness, sometime perhaps when we are angry with one another.